Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here together with you. My name is Sam Finn, and I'm the Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together, where we are proud to partner with California Departments of Social Services and Education in supporting the CalNEW program. Today, we'll be discussing safe and welcoming schools. And in any sort of Maslow's hierarchy of immigrant student needs, we always need to remember that legal protections and psychological safety come before classroom learning. They are prerequisites to it. Today, we get to hear from expert speakers who are going to share their thoughts, research, and suggestions for making safe and welcoming schools a reality. And can we go to the next slide? I'm sorry, I can't see the deck. Are we on the agenda? I'm going to
Oh,
assume we are.
yes, it looks like we are.
Okay, so a quick overview of our time together. We'll start with some background on the CalNEW program and this year's webinar series. Then we're going to go from sort of micro to macro in our presentations. The California Newcomer Network is going to get us started with a focus on the classroom. How do we make that feel good and safe for our kids? We're then going to hand it over to Reimagining Migration, who will discuss school level work at that whole site level of coherence and community. And finally, Californians Together will discuss district level action. Now let's go to the next slide and give a little background on the program supporting today's webinar. So the CalNEW program was developed by the state legislature in 2016 to provide supports to socioeconomically disadvantaged newcomer youth and their families through the school system. This initiative, which was administered by the California Department of Social Services, provides grants to 21 school districts across California and is increasingly looking at ways to spread knowledge and best practices in newcomer education and well-being. Every year, CalNEW is proud to support districts and their staff who show incredible dedication to supporting basic needs, engaging families, and developing youth academics and leadership skills. We'll go to the next slide to look at upcoming CalNEW webinars. Our next webinar is on January 23rd. We're going to have San Francisco Unified, Stanford Medicine, and UC San Francisco really share the approach to mental health, to physical medical care, to case management. And on February 20th, we're going to have some of the best sort of academic consultant design researchers from across the country share their thinking on academic pathways and instructional design. We'll go to the next slide. Um, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to ask them. Questions might be addressed by presenters immediately after the presentation. We'll have about 5 minutes for each presentation, or those might be answered using the QA text feature. All of these materials will be sent out to everyone who is registered, probably early next week, and they will also be hosted on the California Newcomer Network website. And with that, we're going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Efrain Tovar is the founder of the California Newcomer Network and a teacher at Abraham Lincoln Middle School in Selma Unified School District. A frequent speaker at state and national conferences, Efrain draws on linguistic theory, design thinking, and technology in developing models and resources for the classroom. He currently leads the CalNEW Community of Practices Classroom Instruction Group. On to you, Efrain.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for all of you that are here today. So I'm just excited to be able to at least share a practitioner's perspective on how we can welcome our newcomers into our classrooms. So, we all know that these students arrive with incredible potential, but we know that they face unique challenges that require our intentional and empathetic support. We know that newcomers often deal with language barriers, cultural adjustment, and in some cases, the trauma of disrupted education. As eduleaders, as administrators, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to make our schools safe for our newcomers. So today, I kind of want to focus on practical classroom strategies that I have used that you could use to foster a safe and welcoming environment for our newcomer students. So the first thing I want to start off with is just learning how to pronounce our students' names. I truly believe that our names are tied to our identity. And for the longest time, I've been called many things in my life. I've been called Ephraim, Ephraim, Afren, Ephraim, but my name is Ephraim. And so the first time a teacher was able to pronounce my name correctly, something inside of me just turned on. I could not believe it that this monolingual teacher made an effort to pronounce my name correctly. For the first time, I felt that I was seen. And so I want to encourage all of you to kind of set that tone for a respectful culture by honoring students' names, right? So, it begins with us modeling that respect and that empathy and curiosity about their experiences. I truly believe that every newcomer has a data story, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively as well. And sometimes that qualitative data story requires us as edu leaders to take time to get to know our students, to see them with assets, to see them with gifts and talents as they come into our classrooms, regardless if they're life newcomers or safe newcomers, right? This can be as simple as, learning how to pronounce their names again correctly, or as using transformative as we integrate their stories into our curriculum. Train staff and students to embrace a culture of respect where the differences are seen as strengths and not as weaknesses. We can do this by establishing norms that prioritize active listening, kindness, and especially when addressing sensitive topics such as migration stories, cultural identities, and language differences. Here we go. Next slide. So I love this quote by Dale Carnegie. He says, a person's name is to him or her the sweetest, most important sound in any language. So I want to give you a challenge this afternoon. So I encourage you to Google Santa Clara County Office of Ed, my name, my identity, and take that pledge to take that step forward as you begin to make an effort to pronounce your students' names. The second thing I want to kind of share with you is about the importance of building a classroom that reflects their identity. I truly believe that before we teach, we have to reach. Let me say that again. Before we teach our newcomers, we have to reach them, hence teaching. So we must teach. So a representation matters, right? When newcomers walk into our classroom, they should see reflections of their culture, of their language, right? Of their heritage. Dedicate spaces to display artifacts like flags, maps, photos from students' home countries. Encourage students to bring in items that are meaningful to them and creating a culture corner that evolves as new students join. Also, use culturally responsive materials in your teaching, whether it's texts that explore themes of migration or images that reflect diverse communities. These resources send a message. It sends the message, your story matters to me and it matters to us. So third point, let's use peer support systems. Peer connections are invaluable. Would you agree? Especially for helping newcomers acclimate. One effective strategy that I use in my classroom is to create home teams. These small groups where students with similar language backgrounds or shared experiences can support one another. Assign roles based on strains. In my classroom, I have CEOs, I have CTOs, I have CAOs, and COOs. I give them these titles, these important titles that will allow them to acclimate and acculturate into our culture. But more than that, it's about giving them a sense of responsibility, a sense of leadership. It's important to build leadership capacity with all of our students, right? So for example, I have my dedicated classroom language broker, who is the official language broker of my classroom within my newcomer class. That is the one that is able to translate for me. That is a great way that we can use peer supports in our classrooms. And don't forget the importance of cross-cultural peer relationships as well. pairing newcomers with compassionate peers who can model classroom routines and offer friendship in their integrated ELD courses, right? Content courses. This dual approach strengthens the classroom community and helps everyone grow. Finally, let's leverage technology, right, as a powerful tool. It's not just about giving our newcomers a Chromebook or a device, right? It's about utilizing that device as a powerful language tool. And so language is often the biggest barrier for our newcomers, but it's also an area where we can make rapid progress with the right tools, right? Equip classrooms with resources like bilingual dictionaries, translation apps, visual aids. And nowadays, many educators throughout the state are using AI to leverage that language divide. And so these tools give these students autonomy. It empowers them to have access to content while building their secondary and tertiary language. Additionally, scaffold your instruction with visuals, with gestures, and simple, clear language. Provide sentence stems or graphic organizers. What's good for ELs is good for everyone, right? What's good for newcomers is good for everyone. So I want to leave you with this slide, this short video, showing the power of technology.
I first came to school, I felt sad, alone, and scared. I felt alone because I don't speak English. I only speak Arabic. I was sad because I left my family in Yemen. I was scared because I don't know anyone in my school because they speak on their language. But now I felt happy, excited, and optimistic. أول يوم لي عندما جئت إلى المدرسة شعرت حزين وحيد خائف. كنت وحيدا لأني لا أتحدث الإنجليزية ولا أحد يتحدث العربية. كنت حزين لأني تركت عائلتي في اليمن. كنت خائف لأني لا أعرف أحد في مدرستي. كنت وحيدا لأنهم يتحدثون لغة أخرى، ولكن الآن أنا أشعر سعيد بتفاعل المرح.
So what can you do today to make your classrooms and schools more welcoming? So I leave you with this challenge. Maybe it's incorporating a cultural corner in your classroom, starting a peer newcomer support group, or advocating for resources that bridge language gaps. Maybe it's as simple as learning the correct pronunciation of a student's name and modeling that respect for others. Every small step that we take adds up to create an environment where newcomers feel not just welcome, but empowered. Together, we can build schools, we can build newcomer programs that are cutting edge, that are really innovative, so that all of our students can thrive, no matter where they come from and what challenges they face. So thank you on behalf of CAN, on behalf of Selma Unified, for your commitment to this important work. So let's continue building bridges for our newcomers and fostering classrooms where every student knows they belong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Efrain. And let's just pause here. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A and drop it in the chat. And we have a few minutes for Efrain to answer questions. And I just want to share a little memory I have in interacting with Efrain. I got the privilege to do a training with Efrain several months ago, and he gave the same talk about the importance of getting someone's name right. And that's something that I intellectually knew, but I think I felt it so much more strongly after really taking the time to discuss it and hear it. And it was the sort of thing where it made me think of Ryan, like, I need to do better. And so when we can take the time to really do that, um, it really goes a long way. And so thank you for that, Efrain. And let's go ahead and look now. We don't have anything in the Q&A, so we might be able to, my hero too. I think we might be able to just go to our next speakers. Oh, Efrain, do you want to say a little bit about the resources?
Yeah, definitely. you will be getting some resources from me. I don't know how much time we have, Sam, but I wanted to be sensitive to the Sam. I do have a short video in a way that 3 ways we can make newcomer students feel welcome. Do we have time?
You have 3 minutes to use however you wish.
Oh, that's perfect. So let's do this. Crystal, can you just play it for me? Thank you.
Sure, 1 second. This one.
Yes.
Students who have just arrived in a new country face complex challenges in the classroom due to language barriers, culture shock, and potential gaps in education. And in the US, 1 in 4 students come from immigrant households. As a teacher, how can you provide resources and build a sense of belonging for a growing number of newcomer students from all over the globe who may have vastly varying needs? Finding ways to represent the different cultural and linguistic backgrounds of your students can go a long way in making genuine connections in your class. Dedicate an area in your classroom where students can share and showcase their home cultures through flags, phrases, and photos. And ask your students for help on how to pronounce their names and common words in their native language correctly. Write these out phonetically on a note to keep at your desk. It's okay to feel silly or out of your element when trying to use a new language. Your students navigate this every day. Creating a classroom culture that celebrates taking risks and honors students' cultural identity makes for a welcoming environment to learn in. In many cases, newcomers have a lot in common and can collaborate with each other for translation, acclimation, and encouragement. Group students who speak similar languages into home teams that sit together for a portion of each class. Assign roles for each student in the group based on their strengths. For example, a student who is fluent in English could be a translator, or a student who is comfortable with technology could facilitate tech. These interpersonal connections lay a foundation of social and emotional support for newcomers who are deciphering language and academic content daily, and bolster confidence as students tap into and share their strengths. Providing access to tools that bridge language gaps can make assignments and routines more approachable for newcomers, and can further build English language development. Offer online translators and visual dictionaries to students so they can access the definition, image, and pronunciation of words in English as you progress through your lessons. By intentionally connecting with newcomer students, honoring their heritage, and providing supportive systems in your classroom, you can create a space where all learners can confidently take on challenges together.
Well, thank you so much, you guys. You will be getting some resources for me for those of you that are wanting to implement the CEO, CAO, CTO, those positions. You will have a slide deck coming to you within the next couple of days. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Efrain. We are going to go ahead to our next wonderful speakers. I am excited to introduce Misha Lambell, the program director at Reimagining Migration. A former high school educator, she is dedicated to cultivating inclusive academic environments through high-quality resources and purposeful programming. Also in the room today, perhaps joining us for a panel discussion or questions afterward, is Adam Strom, the executive director at Reimagining Migration. He has developed resources with Reimagining Migration and other organizations that have been used in tens of thousands of classrooms and experienced by millions of students worldwide. We are excited to have Reimagining Migration with us today. Misha, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being with us here tonight. Let me make sure that I can, there we go, perfect. Move the slides. At first, I just want to again say thank you all for being here and thank you for that fantastic presentation. I think kind of as a bridge between what we just learned about the classroom and where we're going to a little bit larger with policy, really wanting to name and thank the work that educators like you all are doing in each individual classroom. And we have these 7 steps for building belonging that are both in the classroom and the school as a whole, because as we know, as much as we can create these havens for our students where they feel safe and empowered and seen, we really also need to make sure that that experience is happening from classroom to classroom, that the whole school community is this place of welcoming for our students. And something that we see really in our focus here at Reimagining Migration is understanding migration as the through line throughout human history. And really recognizing that in this moment, when we are building belonging, we really have to think about how we are serving our immigrant origin students and creating spaces where we are teaching all young people the skills and the dispositions that they are going to need to be the community builders and the leaders that we will rely on with each other as we build the world that we will live in. And so I'm going to go into each of these kind of 7 steps specifically with some of the resources that we have. We will also follow up with you with all of these different resources. And I'm actually only even going to talk about a few of them because we do have so many. And starting off with our first step being building trusting relationships. I loved what we were naming earlier, really about knowing our students' names. And so 2 of the activities we have here are the teacher reintroduction slides and this name activity. And really thinking, right, we're in December, it's not the beginning of the year, but any time is an opportunity to say, hey, we've built this relationship, but here's a little bit more about me as your educator. Here's maybe what I studied or why I'm in this space as your educator, or what my migration story is, or my, story throughout my family as to how I've arrived in this town or how I'm here right now. I'm really thinking about just different ways as a teacher to introduce ourselves to our students that isn't solely about academics and progress and, what next score they're getting, different ways in which we can relate about, perhaps as an English teacher, the novels that we're reading and what really inspires us. And the next year, we also have a name activity of really providing opportunities for our students beyond those first weeks to do those icebreaker activities and get to know one another and really just have, again, those moments to build community and different ways where we can even try to find ways to connect that aren't specifically linguistically based. So that way you can have students, holding up different cards of yes or no for foods or different things that allow them to communicate and build relationships with each other. Another activity here that we also have is the student community building, and it is a handout for teachers to use to really think about what being a new student in your school feels like, right? Having these questions on how should we refer to you in class? What are some of your interests? But also, like, what does friendship look like to you? How would you look for a friend? How would you like to make a friend? And even thinking, would you be open to perhaps having a student guide you around for a day, a week? Would you be interested in joining a group or a team or a club? Yesterday, we did a webinar where we were having people imagine what it was like to be a 4th grade student going to their first day of school. What would you hope to see and feel and think? And one of the things that people said is they would hope that someone would save them a seat. Like that was what would make them feel so good, is to say, "Hey, oh, I know someone is like saving me a seat when I go to this next classroom," or for someone to look and say, "Hey, come sit with us at lunch." I think it'd be hard as adults and educators who are so far beyond high school, middle school, elementary school to put ourselves into that position of really going throughout the day being like, is someone going to invite me to hang out with them at recess? Like, is someone going to look around and say, that was a great idea when I shared out in class? And that as much as we are so focused on our lessons plans and what they're going to get out of the day and all the things we have to do, recognizing that for young people, sometimes what they're thinking of is just like, am I going to belong? Will I feel welcomed here? And so just thinking of different ways that we can build relationships with our students and also think about their needs for community and plan for that. Have students pointed out who are your welcomers. And then next here we have ensuring safety and inclusion. And so I want to talk about 2 of the things that we have here that could potentially be really useful directly in conversations with students is the belonging survey. And again, right now we have it translated into Spanish. We're always looking for more support in translating all of our documents. So if that is something or a skill set that you have, we would love to be in collaboration with you all. And a lot of our materials we say are in pilot mode. So when we hear something is needed, we make it, we build it, we change it. But 2 things we have here being the belonging survey as an opportunity to really just get a temperature check. And especially if you can do it as often as possible to really say, are our school's activities inclusive? Do our students feel like they are a part of the culture that we're building? And then also a learning environment audit form, which is an opportunity for you to walk around your school and say, okay, you know, what are the rules that we have in place? Who am I seeing on the halls as celebrated? Who are we highlighting and for what? What are the things that we are rallying around as a community? In addition to that, we have 2 documents that can help you then also bring in administration. So first we have this building belonging brief that really goes into the brain science behind belonging, how important it is. I think as our friend just talked about, the risk taking that can happen in academics and trying different challenging material when you feel like you belong. And we know that one of the most profound ways to ingrain learning is for them to be able to take academic risks, to feel okay with being wrong. And that safety and the things that you need for that happen when you create spaces of belonging. And so this is a tool that you can use to talk to your administration and say, hey, you know, like this is something I'm noticing. We know that as educators, our duty is to teach our students, and this piece of belonging is perhaps missing in our ability to reach what we're trying to achieve. And so how can we focus on belonging as our ethos as a school? And then very specifically, we also then have a follow-up document on fostering belonging and addressing anti-immigrant bullying in schools. And so again, this is another tool that you could perhaps use in terms of engaging your fellow teachers, your administration, and really thinking about how we can have these conversations and have people be in community with one another to have our eye outs for these moments of safety and inclusion, especially as we are seeing bullying and ostracization increase, particularly with really politically divisive language and having that trickle down into our schools. How can we already have a system in place to be prepared when perhaps bullying incidents take place? How can we be reviewing our policies, being really vigilant with our fellow teachers to make sure that we are actually having an understanding or a pulse of what's happening in our schools and with our students? We already know that even though we're seeing these really increasing and bullying incidents happen, it already takes so much for a student to raise that or flag that to a teacher that it's happening. So what can we do proactively to make sure that we have an understanding of what's happening within the social spheres and safety for our students? And again, that's always going to be leaning on each other and doing that in community. Next, we have it again, as this is already previously named, what's happening in the classrooms of making that diversity visible. And then also thinking about how that can bleed into the broader school, how we can celebrate those things that we were doing in the classroom. And so we have a culture responsive checklist that is a little bit more for one's own classroom, but then also want to highlight here an example of Sandy Mendoza, who is a phenomenal and reimagining migration ambassador. And something that she has her young people do is they're in a club together and they're the welcoming committee. And so they stand outside their school and they welcome students in all of their languages. And something that we really want to highlight here with what it means to make diversity visible is these students are now the leaders in their school. Like they are the ones offering belonging, and the ability to be the one to offer belonging, that means that you belong. Like you're not always on the receiving end of, you know, these gifts, that you are the one able to give the gift of community. And now there are students who are all trying to join and be a part of this club, even if they aren't the newcomer students, but really even thinking about what are the opportunities that you have for your immigrant origin and newcomer students to be the leaders who are offering belonging to others and to be the ones that offer, you know, that chance to connect. Another opportunity we have here is the student school culture audit. And so that's a tool to have your students say, okay, let me walk through the halls and see, like, do I see myself or identities like me celebrated in the hallways, in school meetings, in audio announcements, on bulletins? Do I see myself reflected? And having an opportunity for the students to do an audit and then engage in conversation with them. You know, what are different ways in which you could perhaps see yourself or your identities celebrated? And then we also have reinforcing high expectations as another pillar. And so again, another resource that we have here is Unlocking Potential, Celebrating the Strengths of Immigrant Students in Schools. And it's really just focusing on our asset mindsets. Like, what are we aware of the strengths that our students are bringing into our classroom every single day? And I really want to learn more about what was happening with that tech handout too, especially thinking about, we have some students arriving into our classrooms really engaging in philosophy and discourse in their native language, and then sometimes they get to schools in the US and are learning, you know, cat and dog, and are having conversations, and they've expressed frustration to us that, you know, they want to still be engaging in this rigor as they're learning English and speaking in classrooms, and really thinking how we can maintain this understanding of the wealth of knowledge and, again, ability to see the world in a new perspective that every student will benefit from. And here we want to highlight another ambassador's work, Jessica Lander, with We Are American. And this is an opportunity that she gave to her students where they are telling their story. And not only is the book now published and they're telling these, these pieces that are being shared, but they're also going district by district and helping other students tell their stories. And so, again, really thinking about how we can maintain the rigor and the high expectations and just the belief in all of our students, and taking a moment to, again, recognize that we want to see our immigrant origin and our newcomer students as leaders in the classroom. We want them to be running to be, student body president, or running to be, the treasurer of the literary team. And so, again, just thinking about different ways in which we can make sure that we are keeping our expectations always towards the stars. And then next, making migration a lens for understanding. I just want to pause here because this is where we have kind of most of our resources of different stories that you can bring into the classroom. We have a history curriculum reflection tool that's been around for a while, and the ability to just say, okay, what kind of stories am I teaching? Are they first person? Are they second person? Are they primary sources? If I'm using a historical stereotype or cartoon, like, what is my intention here? Why am I introducing this into the classroom? Where is the impact potentially going to be here? And then again, am I only telling one version of a story? Where are there other voices that I can uplift? And so that's what we've had for a while. We're also piloting a literature curriculum tool. Again, very much so a pilot here, but being able to then use the learning arc that was created in collaboration with Veronica Boys-Mencia and Project Zero at Harvard, which follows our understanding of self. So really beginning with this activity of moving stories. And that is the sense that we all have a story of migration, and coming to the table and understanding one another's, and that being that moment where, say, all students have this access point here and we can all see each other. And then understanding migration as a tool with which to learn. What was life like before migration, the journey and the adjustment, and recognizing that migration is not one story. Some was voluntary, some was absolutely not throughout the history of human migration, and really understanding the nuances of what those mean. And then it brings us to the turning to action. So what do we do with this knowledge? How can we create space? How can we uplift stories? And then that we can see within this literature curriculum tools, if we understand this learning arc through literature, we see that the stories of belonging and movement and fitting in and understanding ourselves, like, these are prevalent in almost all of the pieces of work that we read. But this tool is hopefully to give you that arc of understanding of how are you as an individual coming to this work? What is your story that you're bringing to this text? How are you understanding the change that a character is going through, how their identity shifts from place to place, and really thinking about how we can use these tools to also bring forth conversations of the present. And next we have offer support without stigma. And especially now, that is going to be even more important, of thinking about the ways in which we can get materials and support in our students' hands, especially as there will perhaps be hesitancy with signing up for things, naming, information about oneself. Like, how can we be proactive in thinking about what our community members might need? How can we as community members really stay on top of understanding the ways different laws and things are shifting and changing, so we can make sure that we are allies in support of our community members? And one way we can do this is by, again, empowering students to be those supporters for each other. And so, as our friend earlier mentioned, belonging in alliance clubs. And so right here we have a template that students can use and run with, potentially to start their own alliance club. And insofar as with an alliance club here, you have students being the ones that are in their classrooms, they're aware of what they need, of discussing with each other, what are different ways in which we can support our fellow students. Perhaps, we're noticing it's getting cold out and some of our peers need coats. Like, how can we do a clothing drive? What can that look like? And they can develop student action plans with each other, and really thinking, I love that example of having like the CEOs and the CTOs in class, and thinking about our young people as community organizers and community builders. And so how can we give them the space and the time and the support for them to notice what their peers are needing and say, okay, like, how do we create a plan to solve this? And how can we be teachers or club leaders that lay the space out for our students to be able to do that? Next here, we also, again, have this learning environment form, which has the series of individual student questions. And these are not to say ask these students these questions, but it says, or it asks you, what do you know versus what you think you know about your students? And really sitting in that moment of saying, okay, like, what do I actually know about my students' experience the moment that they leave this classroom? And how can I, again, without being invasive or asking them things about themselves that they perhaps haven't offered up. Be proactive in having things ready for them that they might need. How can I create that space that they know that I'm the person that they could go to should they need something? And who are the other people that I'm going to rely on as an educator to be able to support my students? And again, we don't do any of this in isolation. And this is why we kind of bring it out to the school level. Of our schools are community hubs. They're places where, sometimes we're voting, sometimes this is where we go when there's a natural disaster. Our schools are centers of community. How can we also make them places that allow resources to be accessible without stigma? And again, that's really where we're hoping to have the students lead that, because they know what each other needs and they know the way that they would like to be able to share it with their fellow students. And then lastly, we have celebrate family engagement. And so here we have quite a variety of resources. First, we have the newcomer kit, which again, we are always hoping to add to. This is a variety of different resources from different organizations, whether it be some of the more up-to-date laws and policies we have around language, resources and tools for different ways to have a like a parent-teacher conference night if you're navigating different language barriers. And so here, there's a plethora of resources from different organizations. Next, we have our community audit. And here we're saying, or we're presenting an opportunity to go into your community and really think about, perhaps if you only have a few newcomers, or if your school has a variety of different people from across the world, what does it look like to be a young person and build community? And so we have these questions here, just, I think going around. I think it's even a more accurate exercise if you're able to do it via public transportation. But where are there places that are accessible to all? Are there spaces, where there is supervision, where a parent could feel safe sending their child, that they could also go and make friends? Where there's places for them to learn a new skill, where there's places for them to develop a hobby that are, free to low cost, accessible by public transportation, physically accessible by all. And again, have health protocols perhaps in place. Like, where are the spaces in your town or your community where young people can gather? And then when you're there, are you seeing young people gathering? Is it people in groups, or are they really being able to meet new folks? And just, again, I think taking that step back and saying, what would it be like or feel like to be a young person in my community? And what can I do to help create spaces for them to, get engaged and get to know one another? And then thinking about bringing in our families. And so an example here again with Just Lander is Tasting History. And so this was a cookbook that they put together. They went home with their families. They have their translation in their language and in English of the different recipes that were traditional or would make them happy on a rainy day. And they've collected them in this textbook. And so not only can they share these recipes with one another and with the broader community, but also they now have their cafeteria and school staff working to, I think it's like every couple of months, make these meals for each other. And so they're actually getting to have a little bit of their home culture in their dining experience, because we also know that dining and eating and being in the lunchroom, like that is such a community building experience. That is such a way to connect with one another. And it's such a beautiful opportunity to uplift and highlight the different experiences that our students are bringing to the table. And then also, again, another name activity that we have on our website of just, again, different ways to celebrate our individuality and the ways in which we feel really connected to ourselves and to our communities. And I think that is all we have here, unless there are other questions. Yes.
Thank you so much, Misha. That got me really excited
Amazing.
oh yeah. I am really excited to read through everything, some of which I've already read. As we see if questions come from the group as well, I have a couple that I'd love to throw your way. Um, Reimagining migration, of course, you both develop these great resources, and then you also do trainings and support with schools. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more from that implementation, science, and change management side. What's successful in really changing the culture and environment of a school? What does that look like?
Absolutely. And then Adam, if you want to join in here as well with me, I know he's out there in the panel audience. I think something that we really like to start with really is that moving stories piece with staff. And that is just the opportunity to bring everyone to the table and really, again, encourage everyone's voice to be a part of this. And we can't do this work alone. And so creating opportunities where every single staff member feels an ownness to being a part of the conversation and that they are invited in and that they do have such a profound possibility to shift and change the culture for their students. And so I think that's really just number one, is like bringing people in, building community as staff and adults. That way we can model that for our children. And then again, learning a little bit about the history of, again, each other, but then also I think being able to bring new voices in is presenting an opportunity for staff members to bring a little piece of their history into the conversation as well. And so just expanding that purview, but then also providing, again, the different materials to say like, hey, this is something you can use in your classroom immediately to build connections with your students. Like, I've got you. I have your support here. Like, oh, what is your relationship with this student? Like, I had them last year. And so something that we've seen that has been the most profound is just creating that space for educators to be able to lean on each other and then developing action plans. So we collaboratively will sit down and again, I think everyone discusses some of the things that they're seeing, some of the ways that they need to lean in on each other, and we do action plans. And some people might choose an individual student to focus on. Others might say, okay, I have this cohort of students where I'm needing a lot of support. And we develop an action plan of what we're going to do by the end of the quarter, by the end of the semester, by the end of the year to create spaces for belonging. And then that has really allowed our teachers to lean in on one another. And I think a small example is like we had a teacher focusing specifically on one student's experience in the cafeteria. And everyone was brainstorming different ways in which they could meet that one student's needs. But in doing so, it broadened up the conversation on the ways in which the cafeteria was inaccessible for a whole variety of students with different reasons. But in that one conversation, the action plan then scaled so much larger to what are we doing with school, like with waste? How are we, we have so much food. How are we getting into people's hands? And so I think I'd first say is like bringing everyone to the conversation. And we do that through moving stories, to creating that community of who we can lean on in our schools and how we can support our administrators and our teachers. And then 3, developing action plans. But also something that we do is having hopefully their ability to survey students and get that student feedback so we can measure that growth and say, okay, this worked, this didn't work, this is what we're going to do next. I want to make sure Adam has a chance to dive in there before I add any more.
I'm making sure there's no feedback. There we go. I failed. I failed at preventing feedback. I'm so sorry. I mean, I think Misha's answer, I think, was excellent. I will say this, that a lot of our work draws from the framework that we developed with, really it was developed by Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which really starts to identify 5 different entry points. So we like to share that because we recognize that when you're working across a whole school, not everybody's a content teacher, not everybody enters these conversations from the same place. So, so the questions really start from a big picture, which is, helping educate. And again, it's question-based, so educators can start to answer the questions for themselves instead of Misha and I, these folks say from the outside saying, here's how you have to understand this, So the first question is, who are the kids you're educating? And how is their life shaped by migration? The second question is kind of what are the key dispositions and competencies that we actually have to help young people develop in a world of migration and change? The third is how actually should we be teaching about migration in a way that builds a deeper sense of understanding? So content teachers may take that as an anchor, right? But then the next question is how do we build a learning community where all young people can thrive? And that means everybody from the cafeteria staff to the administrators, to the front office staff need to be parts of those conversations, right? And then the last piece is thinking about being very intentionally about the professional development of educators. We're not the be all and end all of this. We're a part of a system, and all of us need to think much more carefully about how to ensure that the professional development of educators includes learning to support newcomers and immigrant students. We know that so often that PD that's around is framed around a language lens. We would like to go much broader than that. We want to make sure that we're respecting all immigrant kids' identities, their whole selves. A young girl from Nigeria is an immigrant, but she speaks English. She's not the EL kid. So how are we going to make sure that we're supporting her? So anyway, that's the big picture framework. I hope that answers your question, Sam.
That's great. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Misha. Thank you also just again for coming today, sharing these wonderful resources and all of your knowledge. Our last presentation today is from my colleagues at Californians Together, who I'm excited to introduce to you now. Californians Together is really going to be focusing on that biggest piece, from classrooms to schools all the way to districts. How do we make districts safe and welcoming for our students? And to speak with us today, we have Ruth Barajas, who is a project director at Californians Together, with experience as a bilingual teacher, school principal, and district English learner specialist. Ruth brings a nuanced perspective to her current work of training advocates and facilitating networks of practitioner leaders supporting English learner students. Shiladine Cruz Gonzalez is the Deputy Director of Californians Together. A past president of the California School Board Association, she served for 20 years as a board member of Azusa Unified School District. She currently co-chairs the National Newcomer Network and Advocacy Coalition and is a leader in English learner advocacy in California. And with that, I will turn it over to Ruth and Shiladine.
Thank you, Sam. And like Sam said, we're going to speak really to the role at the district level and what you can be doing to create safe and welcoming schools. We always think all of these components are important, right? What happens in the classroom, what's happening at the school, how your school leaders and your staff are informed, and very critically, that at a district level, you have both the leadership and the policies and procedures put into place to make sure that you have safe and welcoming schools across your districts. And so I'm going to start just to take a quick step back. Ruth and I are having a little bit of deja vu because we both have supported a project called Support for Immigrant and Refugee Students, where we spent multiple years going out throughout California, often in partnership with our County Office of Education, sharing with districts across the state what it looks like to create these safe and welcoming schools, when we knew that there was lots of heightened anti-immigrant rhetoric happening across our communities, in the media, sometimes from our elected officials. And you could see the impact of all of that on our students and our families, right? And often our educators really felt kind of paralyzed and frozen, not really knowing how to respond and give these students the support they need, right? And this is all just to share, to just reinforce that this is why it's so important that we, as the education systems, as the local education agencies, as the schools, as the teachers, as the classified employees, are ensuring that our schools are safe and welcoming spaces for our students to counter any chilling effects or fears, right? Because it's so critical that our students and their families feel welcome in our schools. And the reason I talk about chilling effects, or let me just speak a little bit about the California context. And just to give you California context, this is some data that comes from Pew and CDE and some other resources. A little under 5% of our students, approximately 1 in 25 Californians, is an undocumented person. So this is just a total population. 9% of our students in K-12 have at least one undocumented parent at home. And about 20% of California children live in mixed status families, meaning some people in their families may have an immigration status, and then some do not have. So think about that. 1 in 5 children in California live in a family where this kind of heightened rhetoric, threats of deportation, directly affects and impacts their families, right? Whether or not it affects them directly, it has an impact on them because of the family that they live with and the people that they love and they care about. I do want to take a step back and talk a little bit about why we say, especially in California, that schools should be safe and welcoming spaces, and why we have an obligation to make sure that they're safe and welcoming spaces. And I want to share, just remind us all about 2 really critical Supreme Court cases that really lay the ground foundation for the work that we do with English learners and immigrant students. And the first is Lau versus Nichols, which is a court case in 1974, made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, that came out of a lawsuit of Chinese immigrant families in San Francisco who sued the district because their children were being taught only in English and they could not access the instruction that they were given because it was not given to them in an accessible manner. The Supreme Court ruled at that point that LEAs must take affirmative steps to ensure that English learners can meaningfully participate in education programs and services. And this really undergirds almost all of our English learner services and programs that we offer both in the state and across the nation. The other really important court case is Plyler versus Doe, which is a court case out of Texas that also made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, because in Texas, they tried to say, if you're not here, if you don't have authorized status, then you cannot attend our public schools, right? And so this was in the 80s. This court case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that under the Equal Protection Clause, that education for minors, education for school-age minors, regardless of status, is guaranteed under the Equal Protection Clause. And that means in our K-12, our TK-12 schools, in California and across the nation, students are guaranteed a right to free public education. Additionally, in California, this was further tested in 1994 when Prop 187 passed, trying to do something very similar in California. That never went into effect because there were immediate lawsuits, and that proposition ended up being thrown out, just reinforcing in California that regardless of what happens at the federal level, we still have these protections at the state level, these access to public education. And this becomes an important thing to bring up because, many of us think that certain things are settled case law, and we've discovered in recent years that that's not necessarily true, right? And so, and just to share, there are some places in other states where they're already trying to test Plyler versus Doe and trying to pass state laws that say, well, no, you can't come to schools if you don't have legal status. So just know that this is some place where we as Californians Together and many educators we're hoping will play a proactive role in trying to ensure that we protect these rights, not just in California, but across this country. And along those lines with Plyler versus Doe, currently, the federal government has what's called the Sensitive Locations Memo that was put out by Immigration Enforcement by ICE in 2011 that said that immigration enforcement would not take place at sensitive locations as to avoid having a chilling effect, including schools, hospitals, churches, and a couple other places, right? And this memo, I think I think we share as a sort of additional protection currently that really discourages and prevents immigration enforcement to come to schools and do immigration enforcement. If you see news in the last day or two, you'll see that there's been leaks into the news saying that the incoming administration is planning on eliminating the sensitive locations memo. I will just say, I think what it means, and we'll talk about later on, is really districts really have to be really ensure that they're putting in processes so that they understand what happens if immigration enforcement comes to your district, that you have a process in place and everybody knows what they're supposed to do. As my colleague I'm not going to turn it over to my colleague, will share, we have additional protections in California that even if this memo would go away, we have protections in the state that really support our schools in limiting immigration enforcement on our school campuses in California. So I'll turn it over to you, Ruth.
Yeah, that's right. In 2017, California passed Assembly Bill 699, and that took effect in early January in January 2018. And what essentially was required in that was guidance from our Attorney General around certain ways to promote safe and secure learning environments for schools. And I'll go over some of the key points of that. And it also required school boards to update their policies, and that they had to, on the books, have policies adopted by July of 2018. So, like Shilonin said, there are things in place that we are able to support because of what we've done in California. Next slide, please. The Attorney General at the time, Javier Becerra, said every student, regardless of immigration status, is entitled to feel safe and secure at school. In California, nearly half of all children live at least with at least one immigrant parent. It's our duty as public officials and school administrators to uphold the rights of these students so that their education is not disrupted. So when we go into what is it, what are safe schools for immigrant students according to Assembly Bill 699? Well, it confirms that all students have the right to attend public schools regardless of immigration status. Again, backing up and reinforcing Plyler. And it also prohibits discrimination based on students' actual or perceived immigration status. A student's district complaint process must now also include discrimination based on immigration status or, again, perceived immigration status. Students cannot collect information regarding citizenship or immigration status of the students or their families, and they must also be informed of their children's rights to public education. Regarding their regardless of immigration status or religious beliefs. So this is the beginning of kind of an infographic that we're going to be sharing out with you that was put together by the CTA and a lawyers committee for civil rights and College for All coalition. So anyway, the other parts of it are that students must be educated about the negative impact of bullying based on immigration status or religious beliefs. And there also are preventative actions that need to be in place also related to that and responding to bullying. Attorney General must publish policies, which we'll go over in a second as well, to keep immigration enforcement and agencies out of schools. And they must adopt these policies. So we talked about that timeline, where July 1 of 2018 was where it all kicked in. And it requires schools to work with parents to update emergency contact information and comply with the parents' instructions. And not just call Child Protective Services if the parents are not showing up for any reason. So that's something that we have to keep in mind as well. So if we go to the next slide, what you see is basically a summary of the district policies that must be specifically addressed. They must address these items, and this came from the guidance from the Attorney General. So the areas in which the policies need to address. The first area is gathering and handling of student information. And this is intended to avoid barriers, to enrollment and protect data, of course, and protect the safety of students and families. And so in that realm, one thing that we're going to be avoiding is requiring birth certificates as the only school registration a requirement. A best practice would be not collecting information, based on family immigration status or citizenship. It is actually providing a list of acceptable alternatives for establishing residency. That could be anything could establish their age. There's other types of documentation that could be used. Excuse me, like student's records, from their home country that might have to do with their baptism or other things, or could even be self-certification. And that your staff and the people in contact with the parents on the front line are trained in these areas. And so that we are protecting their data. And when data is collected for another reason, like for Title III qualifications, that they can be collected but separately from the enrollment process, and then it be done, with trusted staff members that you have that are trained to know where to do that in sensitive information. So then the second area is sharing student and family information. So in this area, again, what you're avoiding is disclosing family information without a court order. It bars the release of information to authorities, the immigration enforcement purposes, without a valid court order. And it's really important that these requirements, and also in the provision of the requirement, that the procedures that parents are notified of these procedures annually. And that, again, your staff knows that they need to have consent from a parent for sharing any parent information, and that they also are requesting, again, any sort of documentation on court order. Otherwise, they're not supplying any information. And then another best practice, just to point out in this, would be that staff documents that might be requested by authorities are also documented, so that at your site you're documenting who's requesting this and for what purpose, so that you have documentation, even if you're not granting them information, to keep a record of what's going on and what kind of people are asking for information. The third area is responding to requests for access in school grounds for immigration enforcement purposes. So a violation of that would be allowing ICE to enter school grounds and access students on campus. That is prohibited. And that you need to have your staff properly trained to respond to requests for access. Again, there are only those documents, like a warrant for information on, connecting with somebody. Also, another best practice related to this is to put flyers and posters around in prominent places in the school to ensure that students and families and schools understand that this is a safe place and these are safe spaces. And to also conduct know your rights information sessions. Again, it's part of the guidelines established by the Attorney General. And we're sharing out those guidelines from the Attorney General with you in the resources and in the chat. And those guidelines are also on the very last page of it is a list of those explicit rights. So it's really a great resource. The whole document is a wonderful resource, but in particular for the rights of parents and families is the very last page, 54, I think it is. And then the other is responding to detention or deportation. So of course, we're in all efforts wanting to avoid any students witnessing any sort of dramatic separation. And for most part, you would not see ICE on your campus because of the reasons we mentioned a minute ago. But another thing is, if you do know that a parent has been detained or they're not picking up a child for some reason, you're going to be avoiding calling, Child Protective Services right away if the parent's detained. What the provision is, or what the guidelines and the establishment of your protocols are, is that you have something arranged, you have some arrangement already made for what you're going to do to handle student care needs. And that you're going to have resources available so that parents can make contingency plans in planning for separation, and so that your staff understands what that protocol is. One thing that you may consider is having all families, not just families who might be at risk of detention or deportation, but all families have become part of a norm for their planning for an emergency, for any sort of family separation. And that way you're also not singling out parents in this way. But it is important that you do recognize this need and that we do establish emergency plans and that they have an opportunity to be able to plan for that. And then finally, the responding to hate crimes and bullying related to national origin or perceived, immigration status, all of that is, again, there are policies now in the books related to this. And this has to do with making sure that you're responsive to bullying. So you're not going to be ignoring reports and you're not going to be exposing individuals that may be reporting, but you want to be reinforcing and streamlining that opportunity for people to report that so you can prevent it. And then also engaging in school-wide community efforts to foster belonging, and to address the anti-immigrant bullying, such as some of the materials that Reimagining Migration has shared, excellent materials that help to build trusting relationships with students and community. So those are some of the areas, and again, recognizing that everyone needs to be trained in all of these areas on the procedures, and that the communication needs to happen among the community of staff, your staff as well as your community, and that the complaint process that you have is clear along any violations related to this so that you can be addressing those needs. Next slide. So, there's a process here, right? So first, there's this adoption of policy, important policy to protect students and data and to make sure that you don't have unintended barriers to enrollment. And then implementation of that plan. So a lot of people right now are asking themselves, wait, where are those policies? Where are my board policies? Well, we have a tool in there that you're going to have in the chat and also in the materials that helps you find those policies for those school districts here in California. And then, but the question is, do you have a plan for implementation? Are people being trained on these policies? And even if they were adopted, in 2018, there may be new staff that might not be aware of it. So it's really important that that ongoing training happen. And then the next step is accountability. Is it happening? Are those things in place? And if they're not, are you reporting that out? Are you working on that to try to improve that? And I believe our next slide is going to be over to you, Shilaneen, for reflecting on this.
And so we just want to take a quick break. We do see the questions in the chat and the quick Q&A, and so we will answer those at the end of our presentation. But we just want to take a quick, we just shared a lot of information that a lot of policies and processes that districts have to think about as they think about safe and welcoming schools, right? And so we want to take a quick break and each have you guys share if you're, as you just reflect and if you're comfortable sharing the chat, like what elements are evident in your schools and districts, right? What areas need immediate attention or need to be strengthened? And as you're reflecting and maybe sharing in the chat, I'll say some of the ones that we commonly see are within the enrollment process, often whether you have a site-based or a districts level enrollment process, right? Are those people that are doing the intake? Do they understand the different ways that families can prove age and residency, right? These are often some of the blocks we see. Often asking for information that they don't need, like social security numbers or birth or like year of entry into the country. These are things that we do not need to collect, but often people aren't. So these are the kinds of things that we want you to go back and think about, right, with your district. And just sharing, regardless of what position you are in your district, right, these are actually required, these things that Ruth has been sharing across the state, right? So maybe you're not at the district, you're not at the like assistant superintendent level, right? Working directly with your board around board policies, right? But you have the information and knowledge, and so it's very important for you to share with your leadership around what you should be doing so that your district can be responsive. So I'll stop there, and we'd love to have maybe some people share in the chat really where they feel they are or things that they really want to go back and focus on in their districts. Enrollment processes, I'm saying plans for parent and guardians, right? A big focus, I would say, several years ago was around ensuring and guiding families through developing an emergency action plan. And there were some really great model or templates out there to use. And so those are some things that I think will start circulating again. The another place where we see uh, a lot of need to focus on is this whole immigration enforcement piece, right? Like you need to make sure that your frontline people at your school sites, your principals, really understand what should happen if something, whether it's immigration enforcement or some other law enforcement. And we suggest you actually, as you develop those policies, you go beyond just immigration enforcement and think about any enforcement, right? That you have clear processes that loop in your superintendent and your attorneys to really validate whatever documentation someone is bringing to try to get access to one of your students. So just a lot of work, I think, to be done back in districts just to remind people what they're supposed to be doing. And we're very excited that all of you are here, and we'll continue to work across the state to try to communicate not only the importance and the requirements to do this, but also the value it has in terms of building the relationships with your community. Just along these same lines, right? We're just going to reinforce what we're saying. Really important to go back and review these policies. Most likely your districts adopted the policies in 2018 when they were acquired. What they mean and how they're interpreted and how they're being used, really, it depends on people going back and really understanding that they're there and how to use them. We do have, and we'll share a link in a little while, we do have there are immigration rights organizations that provide know your rights trainings, will give individual legal advice, right? And building those relationships and knowing where to connect, whether it's at a district level or at a site level, are just really helpful tools for you to have in your toolbox. Along with that, the state actually has a list of legal service providers that they fund to do some of this work. And I think last we'll say, like, some of this stuff, I think, having a know your rights session at a school, is a really great way to support your family. But you also can find ways to, maybe if you have a newsletter that goes out, some of this can be integrated into that, so families don't feel like they're being called out, right, by going to a workshop at your district. I mean, and often with good relationships, those workshops will be very successful. But you can just think about what are the different ways that we're communicating with families and sharing information, right? Because you do have multiple channels. And I would just add to this, think about if you have community schools, right? This is a great opportunity to integrate the needs of your newcomer students, immigrant students and their families. Ruth?
Yeah, so again, another recommendation is that districts hold district or regional trainings on the use of age-appropriate standards-based classroom lesson modules that are centered on topics such as immigration, detention, family separation, and resiliency, like the ones that we actually were called to develop in collaboration with Loyola Marymount University Center for English Learner Equity. And these are a number of the reference of the books that were actually in the materials, and we'll put a link in the chat as well to these materials, again, that were developed to kind of raise awareness of these issues and also help to build empathy and understanding of the immigrant experience, as well as building resiliency and other skills related to social emotional learning and strength and building on all the resilient skills that our students have. But yeah, so that's another example of how district can take the lead in saying, hey, we're going to be providing opportunities for this. And by the way, all those materials can be downloaded for free from our website for use. And then the other thing is to be considering the fact that you are trusted advisors, but you are not, we're not attorneys, correct? So we don't have the ability to advise students on or families on law. But what we do have is we have free legal services that are funded through the California Department of Social Services. And this is very, very important. A lot of times families are targets of scams, and we want to be sure that they have the best information they can. And so there's a link that we're also providing there in the chat. You have it, and in the resources for providers. And when I was a teacher and a school site principal, when I realized that there was a list out there of people in my region who were supported by our California Department of Social Services to do this very thing, it gave me such peace of mind. And I think all of your community liaisons and anybody who's in touch with students would have a nice peace of mind when they come across a situation where people need that support.
And then finally, I would say, I think everything we shared is really required by law in California. One thing that's not required, but we very much encourage it, especially if you have leadership on board, is to have your district pass either a sanctuary or safe haven school resolution, and or have statements from your superintendent. We've already seen examples across the state of both of these happening. Just because those very public statements and resolutions send a message to your community about very clearly that you expect your schools to be safe spaces for your families, and really I think are well received by the immigrant community. I will say, even if your district did pass one of these resolutions back 2017, 2018, there's nothing preventing you. You may have had changes on your board level. We actually encourage you to redo it. We've had examples like, for example, LA Unified 2 weeks ago renewed their sanctuary school resolution, and we're starting to see that in other districts across the state. And then finally, we'll say, I think many of you, we actually met, Ruth and I've met many of you in the past doing our workshops that we did across the state. Under the umbrella of All In for Safe Schools, partnering with some other partners like the Children's Partnership and CABE. And we're planning on finding a way to bring that back, because we know we have 1,000 school districts. We have tens of thousands of schools in our state, right? And while these are the laws on the books, it really takes individual action to make sure that they're implemented, and they're implemented well, right? And so we look forward to working with all of you, hopefully with some partners at the county office level, so that we can make sure that this information is getting out across the state. And then I just want to add, just to put on your radar, so in the previous, when AB 699 was passed, there was also a similar bill to protect higher education. The one big gap was around early child education, daycare sites and early childhood centers. And that was actually removed from AB 699 under a previous governor. And so there's already been proposed legislation released by Assemblyman Marzouchi, who's chair of the Education Committee, that would bring those same immigration enforcement protections down to daycare centers and early childhood. So just sharing that because that's already been it was submitted like on the second day you were allowed to submit bills for the new legislative cycle. So just sharing that just for information. And then with that, we'll wrap it up. We did see some questions about like seniors with DACA and FAFSA. Just two things so with DACA, and again, Ruth and I are not legal experts, and so really important to sort of reach out to those with legal experts. My understanding is currently the federal government is not, because of lawsuits, the current government is not processing new DACA applications, right? So people have been able to renew DACA, but right now they're not processing new DACA applications. And then with FAFSA, there's two organizations that I would tell you to turn to. One is our California Student Aid Commission, and then the SoCal CAN, which is SoCal College Access Network. They've been putting out information and holding webinars talking about FAFSA and what it means for either students that are undocumented or come from mixed status families. And I will just say, the short of it is that even CSAC, so at our federal agency, they're saying they really can't guarantee what's going to happen with data that's submitted to the federal government, right? And so it has to be a personal family decision about whether or not they apply to FAFSA or not, right? I think the state is doubling down on making sure that students understand that there are resources in California with the California DREAM Act application, right, which is an alternative application in California that gets you eligible for state financial aid under the California DREAM Act. That does not go to anywhere but the state. And so I think so I encourage you, and we'll get some resources to share and to send out what CSAC has put out, because it is something that's a concern, and there really is no guarantee of what could happen at the federal level. And then let's see what's any other questions we have. Let's see. I think we answered those questions. Yeah, we look forward to partnering with Gabe, all right, around uplifting this information. All right, thanks, Sam.
Thanks, guys. And let's maybe put down the slides now and have the rest of our panelists join together. And I'd love to follow up on this sort of last point of uncertainty that Shilaneen was addressing. So we had those questions about FAFSA, about DACA, and whatever your role at a school, in this environment of uncertainty, can be challenging to know how to respond to questions, whether it's from parents, whether it's from students, whether it's about actual legal ramifications or whether it's about what may or may not happen next. So I'm curious to just hear from the group, in this current environment of federal uncertainty going into 2025, what should we keep in mind and what approaches should we take when we're talking with students?
So I think I'll just jump in and maybe people can add. So I think that it's really important, right? It's really important to inform yourself so you know, like, so you have information, but it's also really important to realize that, you know, as educators and systems, you really aren't expected to know everything. And so if a question comes from one of your students or families and you don't know the answer, it is perfectly not only acceptable, you should be saying, you know, I don't know the answer to that. Let me find out, right? Because I think what we've seen in the past is a lot of misinformation gets spread about when somebody says, oh, well, I think this is what you're supposed to do, right? And you don't have the information. So Ruth and I, like, when we go out there, we're really clear. If someone asks us a question, and we get it a lot, we'll say, you know, we don't have that answer. Like, we don't know. We'll go find out. We'll go consult a legal expert. We hope that you go and consult your like, if your district legal counsel, right, to make sure that you and your district have the right understanding. And I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
The only other thing I would add is warm handoffs. So if there is somebody that can give them that information, you know, to be able to give them a warm handoff, and often, you know, you might give somebody a name or a number or email and then leave it at that. But I think in the situation with our students, a warm handoff might be really nice, and there may be able to be some information, you know, shared behind the scenes to help the students feel more comfortable.
I think from a practitioner standpoint as a teacher, right? I think we have the most sensitive ears to know what's going on in our students' lives. And so as practitioners, I think one of the things we can do is, relay that information if the students feel comfortable with us being their advocates to our administrators. And again, hopefully you have systems in place to be able to know how to answer the questions that we need answers to.
Sam, I did want to add one thing that I forgot to mention earlier. So there is a project called Path to Papers, that's comes out of Cornell University, but they're doing California work where they are putting out resources and information about how educate so if you are if the employer, so the school district is employing somebody who has DACA, right? There are employer sponsored pathways to be able to get that person work like permanent or work authorization, right? And so unfortunately, I'll say with Path to Papers right now, they're only funded to do this direct legal service, direct one-on-one service within the Bay Area, although they're looking to expand across California. But they have put out resources, and so it is a conversation that your district could have, because I can pretty much guarantee you probably have some DACA teachers and especially classified employees on your books, right? And the district, just out of ignorance, doesn't know that they could probably, because it usually happens in tech industry, right, where you go and try to get these visas for your employees. Districts can do very similar things, right? And so Path to Papers is sort of laying out the pathway to do that for the education system.
The only thing that I would add is I want to make sure. So if I were a young person in school right now, an immigrant or not an immigrant, actually, I think I would be thinking about two things right now. One is we're talking about the federal law, and the government and these sorts of policies. But I don't want to get lost. I don't want what I am hearing getting lost, which is we're in the middle of an outbreak of anti-immigrant bullying that is really strong, really vicious, and really serious. And that we have to have an answer for, right? That there's no passing the buck. And I know we all know that. And I just think it's important, right? So I think what we're all been talking about is making sure we have proactive plans in place before that hits our school.
So let me follow up on that, Adam, because we probably have a lot of individuals attending today, not as whole school staffs or whole district leadership teams, but as maybe independent change agents sometimes within their milieu. And I'm curious, just strategically, how do you think from different positionalities, as a classroom teacher, as a TOSA, as a principal, as a solitary district administrator, whether in friendly or less friendly environments, how do you go about approaching that systems level change for what we want to have happen for safe and welcoming schools?
First of all, I want to make sure I don't dominate the conversation. Misha, is there something that you want to take that, or
You can.
oh, so see, there we go. I try to be, sharing the mic. So first of all, you're talking systems level. I want to start with the individual level and making sure that the victim is addressed first, right? And then the perpetrator is held accountable in a way that is responsible. I mean, I think we were talking, there's a lot of really good work being done on restorative justice work, right? So that's not for me to tell you all, sorry about my doorbell, not for me to tell you all about the restorative justice work. But Misha and I have actually been looking at, and this is actually work done by John Rogers out of UCLA. John looked at anti-bullying laws in the and policies in the United States. And one of the things that John noticed is what was it, Misha? Was it about a 30 to 40% gap in you're this is so unprofessional of me having to walk out of the other room, but there's about a 30 to 40% gap in the difference between schools that actually have communicate that anti-immigrant bullying is actually unacceptable between that and other forms of bullying. So it really, really essential that we work with the administration. If I'm just an individual teacher, I can make sure that my principal, my administrators are communicating very explicitly. It's one step further than the signs that Ruth and Shaloni were saying earlier, right? That these signs are there saying, y'all, this has gotta this is not okay. Number two, I would work with the parents to try to make sure my school bullying policy actually is explicit. It makes a real difference if this is in the language or not at school. So
Yeah, I was gonna say just I think especially as we're seeing in places where I think we say it's a little bit more contentious or that community isn't really clear, really bringing to PD the conversations around bullying and belonging as a very like language that is not specifically tailored in any way that can get flagged. Again, we know that there's a lot of different things that people can't say depending on the states that they're in, but the conversations around bullying and like what the mandated processes are for reporting certain forms of bullying, like making sure that that's really clear within a school and an understanding of what that looks like and what the staff needs to do and be in community with each other so that way that's not happening. And then again, I think focusing this conversation around belonging. And so that brings forth the conversation every single student. And sometimes that is like the first way of finding allies within your school of like just talking about belonging for everybody. And like, what would it look like if every single student came into our classroom and were able to take academic risks? And so I think sometimes it's just starting in that space of being like, okay, maybe I can't explicitly name that my sole focus is on creating spaces for immigrant origin students, just creating safe spaces for every single student. And I think that that can start to be a way to allow people to find the people that they can lean on within their community. Because yeah, again, if you have a teacher that's like, I don't care about belonging for my students, that's not going to be the first person that you will lean on. But finding different people that, you know, through that language can be an access point.
I need to say one more thing and I'll be quiet. But we did just a small survey before a webinar a couple months ago to find out what was going on. And I think it's important to recognize that 23% of students, I mean teachers, had seen an act of anti-immigrant harassment happened that was instigated by another staff member this year. And that was the exact same number as an act of anti-immigrant harassment happening from a peer. 11% of them had seen an anti-immigrant act of harassment at a immigrant family by a staff member. And that was in the end of September.
Which is horrific. Well, and I want to, since time is limited, I want to go to Ephraim, Shilane, and Ruth for three things. I want to ask Ephraim about unions, and I want to ask Shilane about school boards, and I want to ask Ruth about parent engagement. And so, Ephraim, you have been a leader in the union at the local and state levels. And I'm wondering, in terms of systems change for your district and bringing up these issues, where are unions useful and important? What's your advice on that for local educators?
Well, I think again, working collaboratively, ensuring that we either reinstate the policies that we had in the previous era, so that we can ensure that all teachers know exactly how to respond if ICE does come onto campus. But again, I think as practitioners, we need to know with clarity what we can do, right? And legally what we can do ethically and morally. So I think as practitioners, we need to know exactly how to respond to the emotions that many of our immigrant students feel. And so being that first contact, being able to connect them with our local social workers, with our local counselors to be able to process this. Because, not to share too much, but today I have received some bad news in that one of my newcomers is going back to Mexico. And so having that conversation with her and her mother, it was heartbreaking, and again, following those procedures, following those, those systems to ensure that one, I will always be here, and so, and number two is like, let's allow you to, exit with dignity and with respect and knowing that you are always welcome. And we must never forget that all students are our children, that all students deserve every single opportunity while they're with us to achieve their dreams. So.
And Sam, I'll talk about school boards. Like I would say on both sides of the spectrum, right? I think I already mentioned it, how important to have districts pass these safe haven sanctuary resolutions, right? It sends a clear message, even if it's reinforcing the policies you already have on the books, it sends a clear public message. And more importantly, and I always point out Oakland Unified's resolution, they built in reporting accountability measures. So when they passed their resolution in 2017, they gave the superintendent a timeline to develop certain things and come back and report how it was being implemented and come back and report regularly on how things were going, right? And so that can be a very important piece to make sure that the teachers like Efrain understand what they can and should be doing, right? And how they can do it. On the flip side, you know, we just had elections, and so the dust is settling on who has been elected to our local school boards. There have been movements across the country and in California to get people with different perspectives on school boards, and so some people are coming in with agendas really counter to what we're talking about today, right? And in those places where they tried to take those kinds of actions at a district level, it's super important that our communities, our parents, our teachers, our students all stand up. Not teachers, our employees, our parents and students all stand up and say, actually, in California, you can't do that. That's why we have statewide protections, right? You are legally obligated. And we've already seen these fights in other areas, whether it's about book bans, around access for transgender students, right? And so it's going to be really critical that we continue to be vigilant across the state. Ruth?
Yeah, and I think that you know, doing those audits, like people are mentioning, you know, where you're taking a look at what you have happening and how you're communicating things is really important. With regards to parents, of course, number one is making sure that you do reinforce those relationships that you have and leverage those so that you're always available and be ever present for parents. But two, utilize the systems that are already in place and the structures that are already in place. You have regular meetings with parents and in your ELACs, your DLACs. You have maybe parent coffees, or maybe you start to implement more systems that maybe you haven't been doing regularly, but and your parent, you know, newsletters and communications. Always keep all of this information out there and available, and be thoughtful to make sure that you include it. I used to include, when I was a principal, every time I had an ELAC meeting, because oftentimes there were different parents that would come. One might be available this month, a different one next month, but I would always start with their rights. There is no reason to not give them their rights from the beginning, and their right to be engaged in the school and education, but also their rights for safety and security. So so yeah, that's what I would say about parents. And yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. And we're a little past time today. The fact that there's 100 odd people on still at 5:04 on a Thursday speaks to the dedication. Thank you so much to our great guest speakers. Thank you everyone who joined. We're looking forward to seeing you next time, and let's go make safe and welcoming schools. Take care, everyone.